objective for this experiment is 1. To find out how the swallowing reflex is triggered. Second, to tell the difference between cerebral and spinal responses. Third, to determine the speed of impulse transmission. The average reaction time to touch it is measured. Fourth, to assess whether the reaction time to a visual stimulus or a touch stimulus is the fastest. So, we move to the next slide. Introduction. What is reflex? A reflex is an involuntary and predictable response to the stimulus. Most reflexes involve the brain, but some use only the spinal cord. It is a negative feedback circuit that is comprised of 3 main components, which are afferent neuron, interneuron, and efferent portion, or we call it motor neuron. So first, experiment 6.1, swallowing effect. So the requirement for this experiment is glass of water. So there are 2 procedures that we must follow. Swallow the saliva in your mouth cavity and immediately afterward try to swallow again. You will find it difficult to swallow for the second time. So number 2, drink a glass of water and repeat procedure 1. Note that you have no difficulty swallowing in rapid succession.
6.3, which is reaction time to size. Okay, for this experiment, we need the material we need is 2 stopwatch only, and then the procedure is first, the experimenter and the subject should have a stopwatch and start both of the stopwatch simultaneously. And second, the experimenter stop her stopwatch and immediately the subject stop her stopwatch as soon as she see the experimenter stop it. Third, the time lapse was calculated between the experimenter and the subjects. Fourth, so record the data in table 6.1. This is the data that we got from our experiment.
Experiment 6.3, reaction time to touch. Requirements: 2 stopwatches, ruler or measuring tape, lastly, thread or rope. Procedure experiment 6.3. Both experimenter and subject should have stopwatch and start both simultaneously. The subject should close her eyes and the experimenter press her watch to stop and simultaneously trace on the subject's foot. Next, the subject then press her stopwatch to stop. Repeat 10 times, calculate and record the average reaction time in table 6.2. Next, with a thread, measure as accurately as you can the length of the nerve pathway. Lastly, use a ruler or measuring tape to measure the length of the thread used in procedure 5.
Discussion 6.1. In this experiment, we have determined that by swallowing the saliva and rapidly swallow it again is difficult. This is because there is no more saliva in our mouth that act as stimuli, and in order to get the stimuli, we have to wait the saliva gland to produce more saliva again. However, if we drink water beforehand, it is more easier for us to swallow our saliva. This is due to water can replace and act as the stimuli when there is no more saliva in our mouth. For this experiment, it is also important to drink it slowly instead of gulping it down to get the best absorption rate.
For the discussion 6.2, we discovered that the average reaction time of a subject to sight is 1.42 seconds in this experiment. This is due to the fact that it takes time for a reaction to send an impulse to the brain before sending it back to the effector for a subject to perform an action. When the subject sees the experimenter to stop the stopwatch, she receives an and process the information before responding by stopping her own stopwatch. This is known as a cerebral reflex, and it involves the brain processing information. However, the reaction of a subject can differ in each trial because the subject focus on a stimulus can increase or decrease at any time, causing the time lapse of a reaction to become a variable.
Discussion Experiment 6.3 Reaction Time to Touch. Based on Experiment 6.3, we are able to obtain the average reaction time to touch, which is 0.198 seconds. The length of nerve pathway between foot, receptor, and finger, effector, of the subject that we obtain is 2.76 meter. From the data obtained, we can calculate the speed of impulse transmission by dividing the length of the nerve pathway with the average reaction time. So, the speed of impulse is 13.94 meter per second. The precaution steps taken in this experiment is we need to repeat this experiment for 10 times to get accurate results. Then, both experimenter and subject need to start the stopwatch simultaneously to avoid error.
So the conclusion is the nerve control the spinal reflex, whereas the spinal cord control the reflex. Occur in the rest of the body and it involves the spinal nerve. It is easier to swallow saliva than it is swallow water when drink it. This water can actually act as a stimulant to replace saliva in our cavity. As a result, it will stimulate the esophageal muscle to swallow. Spinal and cerebral reflexes are distinguished by the fact that swallowing saliva and reaction time to sights are considered the cerebral reflexes, whereas the reaction time to touch is considered a spinal reflex. The reflex action is fast and uncontrollable. We cannot control it and it is used to protect the body.